Look to Abraham, the prophet says. Look to Abraham, your father, and to Sarah, who bore you, for he was but one when I called him, that I might bless him and multiply him. Look to Abraham. How long has it been since you looked at Abraham? Why don't we do that today so that we might look to him? And to Sarah. Those who pursue righteousness find comfort in Abraham and Sarah. Those who seek the Lord find comfort in them. Episode 1, God calls Abram. Out of nowhere, God said to Abram, "Go from your country and your kinfolk and your homestead to the land that I will show you, and I will make of you a great nation." Abram was 75 years old. 75 years old. There's already a real miracle on the front end of the story, isn't there? To get a 75-year-old man, a man, no less, to get a 75-year-old man to move out of his house, the house he was born in, was raised in, got married in, and lived in for 75 years, to move to another country is a miracle all by itself. But then, when he got to the new country, there was a drought. So Abram just kept on moving all the way to Egypt. To his wife, Sarai, which means my princess, he said, "Tell them you're my sister, otherwise they'll kill me because, baby, you're beautiful." She's 65. Think Meryl Streep. And they did think she was beautiful, and the king of Egypt did take her away from Abram, and God did intervene. But how does Abram look right now, here at the end of episode 1? "They might kill me. Tell them you're my sister." Whose righteousness? God's righteousness, not Abram's. Episode 2, Abram meets Melchizedek. The Egyptians made Abram very rich, and once the famine was over, they moved to their new country, the land of the Canaanites, and they settled near Sodom and Gomorrah. God said to Abram, "Lift up your eyes and look, for all the land that you see I will give to you and your offspring forever. I will make your offspring as the dust of the earth, so that if one can count the dust of the earth, your offspring also can be counted." That's you, by the way. You're the offspring of Abraham, and that's why we're looking to him today. Think of the thousands of years that have passed since this promise was made, and how many billions of people have come to the faith since then. Back to Abraham. There was a war, a world war, as it were. A great king from east, from beyond the mountains, raised an army and headed west, collecting more kings and more armies as he made his way west to Canaan, where he made short work of the little podunk chieftains that dwelt there in a loose confederation, a vast and empty land populated by a handful of cities and a handful of wandering Arameans like Abram. This great king took all their money, installed his tax collectors, and made his way back east, laughing all the way. And he took everything from them for 12 years. For 12 years, they labored under this great king. But in the 13th year, Canaan had had enough of it, so they rebelled. In the 14th year, this great king from east came back to kill everybody. When he came, he brought a terrible wrath, so that the people ran away in such terror that they fell into smoking bitumen pits and perished. Those who survived fled into the hill country. In the meantime, this great king from east took Lot, Abram's nephew. Now Abram had had enough. He rallied his entire household, 318 men, and he met this great angry king from east and all his armies who were used to victory. And these 318 men of Abram routed the army from east. chasing them all the way to Damascus, attacking them day and night until they were forced to return home east without any money and without leaving any tax collectors behind. The priest of God Most High, named Melchizedek, came out to celebrate with them all, and Abram gave a tenth of everything he'd taken from his enemies. And Melchizedek, whose name says, the King of Righteousness, brought out bread and wine. Now how does Abram look? Pretty good this time, right? But whose righteousness is it? Who brings out bread and wine? The King of Righteousness. It's God's righteousness, and Abram is participating in it. Episode 3. The Lord makes a covenant with Abram. Well, after all that adventuring in righteousness, Abram couldn't help but notice he still didn't have an heir. And he had a lot to give away. I mean, a household supporting 318 men has got to be a real operation here, and to have no one to give it to, well, that's just too much for Abram. He complains to God about it. How am I to know? God had Abram cut up a bunch of large animals and arrange the pieces in 2 parallel lines, and kill some birds and line them up. Then God put Abram into a deep sleep. And catch this. A dreadful and great darkness fell upon him. In a vision, God made a promise to Abram, and to make it a covenant, a binding contract. In real life, a pot appeared. A smoking fire pot and a flaming torch appeared and passed between all those animal pieces, which is to say, may it happen to me, like it happened to these animals, if I do not keep this promise, if I break this contract. God said that. God made that promise. It's His righteousness. Episode 4. Abram marries Hagar. Sarai, my princess, became impatient. Now look, she said, it's obvious I can't bear children. Why don't you take my servant Hagar as your wife, and she will bear a child for you in my place? Abram took a look at Hagar and said, whatever you say, baby. And he took Hagar as his wife, and she did make a baby for him. And wouldn't you know, Sarai, my princess, got jealous, just like a spoiled princess might do. And she became a royal pain to Hagar, so that Hagar ran away. Well, let's not forget that Hagar held it over Sarai that she couldn't have a baby of her own. One big, happy family, right? Hagar ran away, but God told Hagar to go back, and she did. Whose righteousness? Not Abram's, not Sarai's, God's righteousness. Abram was 86. It's been 11 years. Episode 5. 13 years later. 13 years later, the Lord appeared to Abram to remind him that, yes, he made a promise. 13 years later. 24 total years have elapsed since that first word of promise, I will make of you a great nation. 24 years. Now, at the tender age of 99, God decides to change Abram's name. No longer plain old Abram, but Abraham, the father of many nations. God considers it a done deal before Sarai has even conceived. And as far as Sarai, my princess, is concerned, she is no longer my princess, but she is Sarah, the princess. And God gave the covenant a sacramental flavor. Those males in the covenant were to be circumcised. And whenever a new male was born, he was to be circumcised on the 8th day after he was born. This, of course, corresponds to baptism. You have been baptized. That's why we're looking at Abraham today. Abraham and Sarah, to look to them to see God's righteousness. Whose circumcision? God's circumcision. Whose baptism? God's baptism. Whose righteousness? God's righteousness, not yours. Episode 6. Sarah laughs. Abraham lifted up his eyes. Hey, are you noticing a repetition? Lift up eyes. Repetition is a flag that says, notice me. Lift up eyes. Abraham lifted up his eyes and noticed 3 men standing in front of him. Quick, he said to Sarah, make bread. And this 99-year-old man ran. He ran to order the veal calf to be killed and supper to be laid before these 3 men, while Abraham himself, a 99-year-old man, and the lord of a household supporting 318 men, he stood like a common servant while the 3 men ate. This time next year, they said, your wife will have a baby. Sarah laughed. After I am worn out, shall I have pleasure? And my husband is old. What a naughty girl, almost 90 herself, thinking such things. She laughed to herself, it says. But they asked, why did Sarah laugh and say, after I am old, shall I bear a child? And she lied. Sarah lied to God, right to his face. She lied, and she said, I did not laugh. Oh, but you did laugh. Whose righteousness? We are chiseled right out of Abraham, the prophet says. Look to the rock from which you were hewn, the quarry from which you were dug. We're no different. It's God's righteousness, and we're just along for the ride. Episode 7. Abraham prays for Sodom and Gomorrah. Ah, faithful Abraham, he who lied to the king of Egypt, who took another wife at the behest of his own wife, who accosted God impatiently about this promise. Faithful Abraham hears that Sodom and Gomorrah are about to be destroyed, and he seeks their reprieve. If you find 50, will you destroy it? Far be it from you to put the righteous to death with the wicked. Shall not the judge of all the earth do what is just? The Lord replies, for the sake of 50 righteous people, I will not destroy it. There are 50 righteous people in here right now. Do you take comfort in that? What about if there are only 45? Well, for the sake of 45 righteous people, I will not destroy it. 40, only 30, 10. What if there are only 10 righteous people found in that place? For the sake of 10, I will not destroy it. In this case, the righteousness of God glows from Abraham like the moon glows with the light of the sun. Now you know the heart of God, that for 10 righteous people dwelling in the midst of thousands of evil people, he will spare them all in order to spare his righteousness. Episode 8. Abraham lies again. At this crucial juncture, in this important 100th year of Abraham, some king named Abimelech found 90-year-old Sarah attractive. Go figure. Tell him you're my sister, Abraham said, and when Abimelech calls him on it, Abraham plays the innocent. Well, she kinda is my sister, being the daughter of my father, but not my mother, so half-sister. Right, Abraham, that's weird enough as it is, but you left out the crucial part about the promise of God that you would be the father of her child as husband and wife. Episode 9. He laughs. Isaac was born when Abraham was 100 years old. Sarah was 90. Finally, after 25 years, they laid eyes on the fulfillment of God's promise. 25 years later, And this time they all laughed for joy. But not for long. The righteousness of God is all around them, and they return to their behavior just the same. 2 years later, Sarah demands Hagar be thrown out of the household along with her son Ishmael. And since she is the princess, God tells Abraham to listen to the voice of his wife. Early the next morning, Abraham takes his wife Hagar. Remember, this is his wife. They were married. He takes his wife Hagar, sets the boy Ishmael beside her. He's about 16 at the time. And he takes a skin of water and he lays it over Hagar's shoulder. Goodbye, Hagar. Thus he sent his wife away to wander in the wilderness where she would surely die. She didn't. God saved them miraculously. A few years later, God demanded Abraham kill his only son. That must have left a mark on the family. A few years after that, Sarah died. Sarah saw only the one. She never saw more than the one, much less a multitude, a great nation. Abraham saw Jacob and Esau. Do you think he took comfort in that arrangement? And then Abraham died. Are you taking comfort? Lift up your eyes to the heavens and look at the earth beneath, for the heavens vanish like smoke. The earth wears out like a garment, and they who dwell in it die in like manner. It was only after Abraham died that things really started cooking, when Jacob fathered the 12 tribes of Israel. And here we are today, counted among the stars God showed Abraham. But my salvation will be forever, and my righteousness will never be dismayed. You know righteousness. It is God's righteousness. Look to Abraham and take comfort. Look to Sarah. We're just chips off the same old blocks, giant blocks quarried out of the earth by the cross of Jesus. It struck the earth and carved out salvation to all generations.